I never considered myself a paranoid person, but in the digital age, privacy feels like a luxury that most of us can no longer afford. It started when I decided to buy a hardened smartphone from a vendor on a popular encrypted marketplace, thinking I was being smart by opting for a device that promised end-to-end encryption and a custom operating system that bypassed the usual trackers. The seller had a perfect rating, and the listing described the phone as a ghost device, something that could never be linked back to my real identity or my physical location. When the package arrived in a plain brown box with no return address, I felt a strange sense of relief, believing I had finally taken my personal security into my own hands. I spent the first few hours setting it up in my darkened apartment, marveling at how clean the interface felt without the clutter of mainstream apps and pre-installed bloatware. The screen was vibrant, the response time was instantaneous, and for a moment, I felt like I was finally invisible to the world around me. But that feeling of safety began to erode around midnight when the phone, which I had placed on my nightstand, vibrated with a notification that I hadn't authorized. I picked it up, expecting a system update or a welcome message from the custom OS, but instead, I found a single image file titled user_01.jpg. My heart skipped a beat as I opened the file and saw a grainy, high-contrast photo of myself sitting at my desk from just 2 hours prior. The angle was unmistakable. It had been taken from the phone's own front-facing camera while I was looking down at the screen. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine because I remembered specifically checking the privacy shutters and the software toggles that were supposed to disable the camera entirely. I told myself it was just a glitch, perhaps a preset diagnostic tool the seller had forgotten to remove, but the believable explanation felt thinner by the second. I tried to factory reset the device, but the menu option was grayed out, and every time I pressed the power button to shut it down, the screen would simply flicker and return to the home screen. That was when the second notification arrived, and this time, it wasn't a photo, but a text message from a blocked number that simply read, "The firmware belongs to us now, and through the firmware, you belong to us too." The realization hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't bought a secure phone. I had invited a predator into the most intimate spaces of my life through a device I intended to carry everywhere. The tension in the room thickened as I realized the phone was tracking my GPS coordinates with terrifying precision, showing a small red, pulsing exactly where I stood in my living room. I decided to leave the phone in the apartment and run to a public space. But as I reached for the doorknob, the phone began to play a recording of my own voice from earlier that evening. It was a recording of a private phone call I had made to my mother, played back at half speed, making my voice sound distorted and demonic in the quiet of the night. Why would someone go through this much effort just to harass a stranger? And what was the ultimate goal of this digital psychological warfare? I threw the phone into a heavy metal pot in the kitchen and covered it with a lid, hoping the physical barrier would block the signal. But the speakers were so powerful that I could still hear the muffled sound of a countdown timer beginning to tick. Tick, tick, tick. Each second felt like a heartbeat, and I found myself wondering if the device was rigged with something more dangerous than just malware. I looked out my window into the street below, searching for a car or a figure that didn't belong, but the neighborhood was deathly still, which only made the internal panic louder. Suddenly, the lights in my apartment flickered and died, plunging me into total darkness, save for the faint, rhythmic blue light leaking from under the lid of the kitchen pot. I realized then that the phone wasn't just a recording device. It was a bridge that allowed someone to access my home's smart hub, which I had foolishly synced to the same network. I heard the electronic deadbolt on my front door slide open with a mechanical thud, a sound that shouldn't have been possible without me physically turning the handle. Someone was nearby, and they weren't just watching me through a screen anymore. They were manipulating the physical world around me. I backed away from the door, my breath coming in shallow gasps, and I felt around the kitchen counter for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers brushed against a heavy glass vase, and I gripped it so hard my knuckles turned white, while my eyes strained to adjust to the shadows. The silence was broken by the sound of my own front door creaking open, and the heavy footsteps of someone who wasn't trying to be quiet. They knew I was trapped, and they knew I was terrified, which seemed to be the entire point of the game. "I can see your heart rate through the infrared sensor," a voice whispered, not from the hallway, but from the kitchen pot where the phone was still trapped. The hacker was using the phone's internal sensors to monitor my biological responses, turning my own body against me in a twisted display of technological dominance. I realized that as long as that phone had power, I was a beacon, a visible target in a dark room. I didn't have time to think, so I grabbed the pot, ran toward the open balcony door, and hurled the entire thing as far as I could into the night. I watched it fall, a small spark of blue light descending into the bushes 3 stories below, and for a second, the apartment fell into a true natural silence. I didn't wait to see if anyone was coming up the stairs. I slammed the door, shoved my heavy bookshelf in front of it, and retreated to the bathroom, the only room without windows. I sat on the cold tile floor for hours, listening to the sounds of the night, waiting for a knock that never came. When the sun finally rose, I walked down to the bushes to find the pot, but the phone was gone, leaving behind only a small, scorched patch of grass and a single plastic business card with a URL printed on it. I never went to that URL, and I never bought another piece of electronics from the dark web again. I realized that the greatest threat isn't the person hiding in the bushes, but the one hiding inside the hardware you trust with your life. I am safe for now, but I still keep my new phone in a lead-lined bag at night, and I never, ever look into the camera lens. The transition from financial stability to desperation happens much faster than most people realize, and when I lost my job at the tech firm, I found myself scouring the darker corners of the internet for any freelance work that didn't require a background check or a long-term commitment. I stumbled upon a listing on an encrypted job board that seemed almost too good to be true, offering $5,000 for a single week of stress testing a new home security ecosystem designed for high-net-worth individuals who lived in remote areas. The recruiter, who went by the handle vigilant_admin, explained that they needed a real-world environment to test the responsiveness of their remote intervention team, and my apartment, located on the quiet edge of the city, was the perfect candidate for their final phase of development. The contract was sent via a self-destructing link, and it outlined a series of tasks that felt strange but technically logical if one were trying to find the flaws in a digital defense system. I was instructed to install a series of sleek, black sensors on my windows and to replace my standard router with a proprietary bridge that would allow their security team to monitor my home's perimeter in real time. They told me that the goal was to see how quickly their AI could detect a breach and alert the local authorities. And to make it realistic, they insisted that I should go about my normal life as if I were a target of a high-stakes burglary. The first 2 nights were uneventful, and I actually felt a sense of comfort knowing that professional eyes were supposedly watching my every move through the encrypted feed of the cameras they had me place in the hallways. On the 3rd night, the instructions became more specific and significantly more unsettling, as I received an encrypted message at 2 in the morning telling me to leave my back door unlocked for exactly 1 hour to test the passive detection capabilities of the sensors. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lock, but the thought of the $5,000 sitting in an escrow account clouded my judgment and silenced the voice in my head that was screaming about the inherent danger of such a request. I sat in my living room with the lights dimmed, staring at the back door, watching the shadows of the trees dance against the glass as the minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. The silence of the house felt heavy, almost liquid, and every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive stillness of the early morning hours. I checked the app they had provided, which showed a green, secure status, but then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The live feed from my hallway camera was showing a looped recording of the empty corridor from 20 minutes ago. I tried to refresh the app, but the screen flickered and then displayed a new message that wasn't part of the testing protocol. A message that simply said, "Thank you for the access. The stress test has officially transitioned into a live acquisition." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I realized that the security team wasn't testing an app. They were using the app to systematically disable every physical and digital barrier I had between myself and the outside world. I rushed to the back door to lock it, but as I reached the handle, I saw a gloved hand slowly pushing the door open from the other side, moving with a terrifying, practiced confidence. I didn't scream. The air had been completely sucked out of my lungs, and I scrambled backward into the darkness of the kitchen, my mind racing to figure out how a group of strangers on the dark web had managed to turn my own home into a trap. The person entering my house wasn't a common thief. They were wearing tactical gear and a headset, moving with the precision of someone who knew the exact layout of my furniture because I had provided them with the floor plans during the onboarding process. I realized then that every piece of information I had given them, the camera placements, the sensor locations, and my own sleep schedule, was being used to hunt me in my own living room. The intruder didn't turn on a flashlight. They didn't need to, because the security bridge I had installed was likely providing them with a night vision feed of my heat signature through the very sensors I had mounted on the walls. I crawled behind the kitchen island, my fingers trembling as I reached for a heavy cast iron skillet, the only weapon within reach in a house that had been stripped of its safety. I could hear the rhythmic sound of their breathing and the soft click of a radio, a muffled voice on the other end confirming that the package was still inside the house and that the perimeter was clear. I knew that if I stayed hidden, they would eventually find me using the infrared data from the bridge, so I realized I had to do the one thing they wouldn't expect. I had to crash the system I had worked so hard to install. I reached up and grabbed the proprietary router off the counter, ripping the power cord from the wall and smashing the device against the edge of the granite with every ounce of strength I had left. The apartment was suddenly filled with the shrill, piercing shriek of a backup alarm that hadn't been disabled, a sound so loud it seemed to vibrate the very air in my chest. The intruder froze, momentarily disoriented by the loss of their digital eyes and the unexpected noise, and I used that split second of confusion to bolt toward the front door. I didn't look back to see if they were following me. I threw myself through the door and ran into the middle of the street, screaming for help at the top of my lungs until the porch lights of my neighbors began to flicker on one by one. By the time the police arrived, the intruder had vanished, leaving behind nothing but the black sensors and the smashed router, which the forensics team later discovered was filled with high-end surveillance hardware that was illegal in 3 different countries. The Vigilant_admin account vanished from the dark web within minutes of the incident, and the escrow account was revealed to be a phantom link that led to a dead-end server in an untraceable jurisdiction. I spent the next month living in a motel, unable to step foot in my apartment without feeling the phantom weight of those cameras watching me from the shadows. I learned the hard way that when someone on the internet offers you a fortune to test your own vulnerability, they aren't looking for flaws in the system. They are looking for flaws in you. I am safe now, but I never trust a device that requires me to leave a door unlocked, and I never, ever answer an ad that sounds too good to be true. The salmon was a bit overcooked, but the company was the real centerpiece of the evening. She has no idea that I am sitting just 2 tables away, watching her laugh at a joke that isn't even funny. I read those words on a pitch-black screen at 3 in the morning, and the air in my lungs suddenly felt like shards of broken glass. I had stumbled upon a localized experience forum on a hidden directory, thinking it was just a strange underground version of a standard review site, but the realization that I was the subject of the latest entry made my heart hammer against my ribs with a violent, rhythmic intensity. The reviewer had posted a photo of the back of my head from earlier that night, capturing the exact moment I had tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear while sitting in my favorite downtown bistro. The forum wasn't for food or travel. It was a crowdsourced stalking platform where anonymous users could request a target and others would fulfill the experience by following them and documenting their every move in real time. I scrolled through the comments, my hands shaking so hard that the mouse rattled against the desk, and I saw that people were actually bidding on what the reviewer should do next. One user suggested stealing a personal item from my purse, while another offered a digital bounty for a photo of my front door taken from inside my own apartment complex. The level of detail was staggering, including the exact time I had left the restaurant, the route I had taken home, and the fact that I had stopped at a convenience store to buy a bottle of water. I felt a sudden, primal urge to check my locks, but as I stood up, the floorboards creaked under my weight, and the sound seemed to echo through the oppressive silence of the empty house. I looked at the screen again, and a new comment had appeared just seconds ago, stating, "She just stood up. I think she's finally starting to realize that the curtains in her living room aren't as thick as she thinks they are." My breath hitched in my throat as I realized the person writing these words wasn't just some distant hacker in another country. They were physically present, lurking in the shadows of the alleyway right outside my window. I didn't want to look toward the glass, fearing that I would lock eyes with a monster in human skin. So I dropped to my knees and crawled toward the hallway where the shadows were deeper and more protective. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke me, and I found myself wondering how many people were currently logged into that forum, watching my life be dismantled for the sake of a few likes and digital currency. I reached for my phone to call the police, but then I remembered a thread I had seen earlier about interference, where a user boasted about being able to jam local cellular signals using a portable device. I looked at the signal bars on my screen, and they were gone, replaced by a hollow no-service message that felt like a death sentence in the palm of my hand. I was isolated, trapped in a digital cage that had been constructed around me without my knowledge, and the reviewer was closing in for the final paragraph of their twisted story. I knew I couldn't stay in the apartment because the layout was already archived on the forum, so I grabbed my keys and a heavy metal flashlight, deciding that my only chance was to reach my car and drive to the nearest precinct. I moved through the dark kitchen, my eyes straining to catch any movement through the thin slats of the blinds, and I heard the soft, unmistakable sound of a camera shutter clicking from somewhere very close to the back door. They weren't just watching anymore. They were documenting the hunt, and the realization that my fear was being monetized for an audience of voyeurs filled me with a cold, sharpening rage. I didn't open the door slowly. I threw it open with all my strength, hoping to catch the stalker off guard, and I sprinted toward the parking garage with my heart screaming in my ears. The garage was a concrete tomb, filled with long shadows and the hum of fluorescent lights that flickered with a dying, yellow energy. I could hear footsteps behind me, not the heavy thuds of a predator, but the light, rapid tapping of someone who was enjoying the chase. Someone who viewed my life as nothing more than a series of data points. I reached my car and fumbled with the remote, the beep-beep of the locks echoing through the hollow space like a flare, and I dived into the driver's seat just as a dark figure rounded the corner of the concrete pillar. I didn't look at their face. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing the terror in my eyes, so I slammed the car into reverse and floored the accelerator, the tires screeching against the oil-slicked floor. As I sped out of the garage and onto the main road, the cell service finally returned, and my phone exploded with a dozen notifications from the forum, each one more frantic than the last. The reviewer had posted one final update: target lost for now, but the review is never truly finished when the subscriber knows the home address. I didn't go back home that night. I drove straight to the police station and stayed in the lobby until the sun came up, watching the world wake up as if nothing had happened. I moved across the country 3 days later, changed my name, and deleted every single digital footprint I had ever created, but I still can't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I sit in a restaurant and hear the sound of a camera shutter, or see someone looking at their phone a little too intently, the memory of that pitch-black screen comes rushing back. I realize that on the dark web, you aren't a person. You are just content, and once the reviewers decide you are worth watching, they never truly stop looking for a way to write the next chapter. I am safe for now, but I live my life in the redacted spaces of the world, hoping that I never again become the centerpiece of someone else's evening.